Hey guys, welcome back to Gatsu Gaming. Today I'm going to hit you with a little bit of a surprise. I've actually been playing Boomkin, which I don't think anyone saw coming. Unless you were checking out the comments in one of my previous videos where someone specifically asked me about Feral Druid. While I was tooling around with Feral Druid, I noticed all the changes to Boomkins that were coming out, and I said, you know what, it's what I started on in Legion, so let's take a look at Boomkin, because there's actually been some really significant and great changes for Boomkin here in the newest build of the Alpha. I said Alpha, I meant Beta. Man, I'm tired. Alright, so checking in here just for the baseline stuff in our spellbook. We still have Bark Skin as our standard defensive cooldown, always useful of course. It does prevent damage from delaying your spell cast, which is incredibly useful, especially whenever you're trying to deal with, you know, a large group of mobs you accidentally pulled with that Starfall you cast. It can be really good for finishing them off before you die. Of course, we still have, you know, our standard bear form, cat form, etc. Celestial Alignment is our standard 3-minute cooldown here. I have not chosen to take Incarnation, which is still around. There's a little more on that later here. But Celestial Alignment, your Celestial bodies align, increasing damage of all spells by 20% and granting you 15% haste for 20 seconds. I believe the current incarnation of it, excuse the pun, on Live, or Legion, is actually a stacking haste and damage buff. It may actually only be a stacking haste buff. I honestly don't remember. It's been a long time since I played Boomkin. But I was told that this is a new version, and I honestly have to say this is a much better version because of its consistency. We still have Dash, still have Entangling Roots. This is actually incredibly useful in so many dungeons. There's so many mobs that you want to keep away from you. And just this little bit of utility here that doesn't actually have a cooldown and it has a great 40-yard range, going to be very useful in Mythic Plus for sure. Fury of Balloon is a talent, we'll get to that later. Still have Growl in bear form because I believe I took Guardian Affinity. Hibernate is back, which is great. This is actually going to be used quite a bit. There's quite a few dungeons where you can use this and where you will want to use this. 40-yard range, 1.3 second cast, 40-second sleep on a beast or dragonkin only. So it does have limited uses, but incredibly useful in places like Freehold, where there's guard dogs. And, of course, most of the Horde dungeons have some sort of animal in them somewhere. When I say Horde dungeons, of course, I mean the ones on the continent of Zandalar, which have a lot of dinosaurs in them, which is very useful because they are labeled as Beast. Still have Innervate here. It doesn't have that buff anymore that we had from the Artifact weapon, so it is just allowing that healer to get free spell casting, which is nothing to shake a stick at. That is actually still a very strong you know, CD and a 5-man, and definitely going to be very useful in raiding for sure. Lunar Strike is one of our 2 generators here. It still has the cleave, and it actually is 100% cleave within 8 yards. Yeah, this is one of those things that you're only going to use if you have multiple targets or if it's empowered. Took Mighty Bash as a talent there. Still have Moonfire, of course, our bread and butter. Moonkin form now gives you a 10% spell damage increase, your armor increased by 125%, and of course you're immune to polymorph. Rest in peace, mages. While in this form, single target attacks against you have a 15% chance to make your Lunar Strike instant, giving you Alkin Frenzy. Did not expect my music to switch on that, but that's okay. Let's see here. So then we've got Prowl there for cat form. We've got our battle res still, regrowth, rejuve, remove corruption. This removes any curse or poison, which is super useful. So many times in dungeons there's a poison that is an insanely dangerous poison, and this has saved quite a few tanks for me already, especially in Temple of Sithralis where there's a lot of snakes. I took Renewal as a talent, more on that later. Of course, still have our baseline Resurrection. Solar Beam, 1 minute AoE interrupt, silences everything in that beam and lasts for 8 seconds. Very long spellbook here. Solar Wrath, our standard nuke. This was actually in the previous build about the only spell that Boom can actually cast besides the 2 dots. Thankfully, that has been fixed significantly with this recent build. Soothe removes all enrage effects on the target, so another ability that's back from the the pruning table, thank goodness. This is incredibly great. I absolutely love Soothe. There are so many enrage effects on the human mobs in Freehold, in Toll to Gore, just all over the place there's enrage effects. This dispels so much. It's super, super useful. Starfall, our standard AoE. Nice big circle of I'm going to pull everything and make my tank angry. Of course, also makes your dots tick harder. You know, really incredible ability. Super, super strong still. Star Surge is our standard single target dump. Very, very good. I love how hard this thing hits right now in beta. It's really fun. I took Stellar Flare as a talent. More on that later. Sunfire, of course, still have that there. That's our spreading AoE dot. Swiftmen, because it looks like I actually took Restoration Affinity. So excuse me for saying that, because we still have Growl regardless. Teleport Moonglade, which I haven't used, but it does let you go ahead, of course, and do your teleport out and back in to, you know, farm older dungeons and that as well. Still have Travel Form. Travel Form is not split into two right now. There was talk that it was going to go to like a Flight Form and Travel Form again, so we could use the different skins, but I haven't seen that yet in beta. So if that changes, I will update the notes here and throw up an annotation or something. So Aquatic Form, whenever you're underwater, you get to travel faster. Always good. Astral Influence here, we get, of course, that extra 5-yard range, so all of our abilities have a 45-yard range. So we can hang out with the marksman hunters in the back. Eclipse is just our standard empowerments there. Lunar Strike is a 20% chance to grant you solar empowerment. Solar Wrath is a 20% chance to grant you lunar empowerment. Those empowerments, of course, are the buffs from... we normally get from Star Surge, which buff our Solar Wrath or Lunar Strike. Empowerments. Total passive here. So Lunar Empowerment increases the damage of your next Lunar Strike by 67% and reduces its cast time by 15%. Solar Empowerment causes your next Solar Wrath to explode for an additional 33% of its damage to all nearby enemies, and reduces its cast time by 15%. I actually didn't know there was an AoE component to this, and it was actually very surprising for me whenever I was using Wrath, and I was like, wait, what are those dots? What's going on? I thought I had extra dots or something, but no, it actually does a little bit of AoE now, which is really cool. So here, of course, is Flight Form. It is listed here. It was listed as a separate form in one of the builds, but for now, it is still just a passive here. I'm not sure if I go back to where I can actually use Flight Form, if it just kind of magically changes, but we'll see later, perhaps. Mastery remains the same. Increases Star Surge, Stellar Flare, Fury Balloon, and Starfall damage by 47%. Increases the effects of Lunar Empowerment and Stellar Empowerment by an additional 47.6%. And then it also increases damage of Solar Empowerment by 23.8. Stellar Empowerment, of course, is for Stellar Flare, which I'm talented into right now. And because I have Restoration Affinity, I also have Ysera's Gift, which is at 3% maximum health every 5 seconds to myself, or if I'm at full health, to an injured party member instead. So now for everything that we're really interested in here, of course, the talents. So Balance did see huge changes to this talent tree. So get ready for a shocker. So this is our new talent tree for Balance here. Everything is moved around, and quite a few things have the same names, but are now completely different than what they previously did. The biggest offender, of course, being Nature's Balance. Nature's Balance used to extend dot duration. It does not do that anymore. It kind of surprised me because I didn't really read it before I picked it. I just thought that's what it was. Imagine that. Reading helps you play this game. Who'd have thunk? But the passive here now is, when in combat, you generate 2 astral power every 3 seconds, and then while out of combat, your astral power rebalances to 50 instead of depleting to empty. So this lets you start out with 50 astral power, which means you can actually lead off with a Star Surge and get your empowerments rolling right away. This, to me, feels incredibly strong. Especially whenever you're out and you're questing in the world, it's so useful to be able just to burst something down that much faster. With that same thing in mind here, Warrior Balloon is still here. It's at 45-second CD. Causes your next 3 Lunar Strikes to be instant cast and generate 40% additional astral power. I'm sure this is probably still going to be our pick for PvP, although I don't PvP. I've made that quite clear before. I remember this being the only thing I was allowed to pick when I tried to PvP as balance and failed miserably. Force of Nature, probably still the go-to for leveling, just because 3 treants that can taunt everything and attack everything in a given area, while also generating some astral power, is really strong. Especially considering that there's some elites out there that hit a lot harder than you expect them to. So our level 30 tier here, this is the same across all 4 Druid specs. I always forget that there are 4 Druid specs. The first one here is Tiger Dash. This replaces Displacer Beast as far as I can tell. What this does is this activates cat form and increases movement speed by 200%, reducing gradually over 4 seconds. This essentially gives you an even better dash. It actually replaces dash, but it makes you move at damn near epic flight speed on the ground, which is pretty crazy. This might be what we're going to use in Raid, but I'm not too sure. Renewal instantly just heals you for 30% of your HP, 1.5 minute cooldown, usable in all shapeshift forms. I use this while leveling just because I hate to stop and heal myself. Even though I took Resto Affinity, swapping out of form to hit myself with the Swift Mend is annoying. This is just a quick Shift Mouse 4, and I'm healed up for most of my HP. It's just for my leveling purposes. Definitely still has its place in Mythic Plus occasionally, depending on the affixes, of course, and your group needs. And then a Wild Charge. This remains completely unchanged. This is still awesome, awesome mobility. Can't stress enough how incredibly useful this thing is. Our 45 tier, same across all Druid specs, you know, omitting, of course, the one spec that you are. Feral Affinity gives you some cat abilities, Guardian gives you some Guardian abilities, and Resto gives you some Resto abilities. For the most part, early on, leveling, etc., I think Resto or Feral Affinity is probably the way to go. Movement speed is always great when you're leveling, especially whenever you are not able to fly, because obviously we won't be able to right away. Guardian Affinity, of course, will most likely be the pick once we get into Mythic Pluses, especially as we get higher and during progression rating. Taking less damage is just... it's unspeakable how amazingly powerful taking 6% damage can be, especially whenever you're talking about a 20-man raid in Mythic, for instance, you know, or in that 5-man where you just need to survive that tyrannical damage on that boss that everyone hates. Guardian Affinity is totally there for you to do that. Our level 60 tier here, this is basically our CC row. We have our options of Mighty Bash, which is still the same, still a 5-second stun. One of the few 5-second stuns left in the game, actually. Has a 10-yard range in Moonkin, or in Balance Spec, or with Balance Affinity. Otherwise, it is a 5-yard range. Mass Entanglement does the same thing as it does in Live. Still useful. Definitely still something that's going to see some use here and there in random instances. Depending on how raids go, might be useful in Raid 2. Typhoon, if Sanguine stays around, which I get the feeling it won't, you know, will definitely be useful for that. Otherwise, it is kind of like an AoE interrupt, in a sense. It does knock them back, it does daze things. This does help control mobs quite a bit in dungeons as well. I just use Mighty Bash because normally I'm only pulling a couple mobs at a time, and Typhooning would actually hurt me personally while I'm leveling, so that's why I have Mighty Bash. If I was leveling with a group, though, Typhoon all the way. Our 75 row here, this one got interesting. So we still have Soul of the Forest, which increases the damage bonuses from Lunar and Solar Empowerment by 30%, and increases reduces the astral power cost of Starfall by 10. So this here, of course, lets you get more Starfalls out and pairs very, very well with Stellar Drift in the next tier. I'm not using this, though, because I like this one much more. Twin Moons, which those of you that have the Balanced Shoulders, Lady and the Child on Live, will definitely recognize. Moonfire deals 20% increased damage and also hits another nearby target within 20 yards of the target. Now, this has hit mobs that aren't in combat with me on beta. I'm not sure if we'll do that in Live, because I do not have them on Live. But this makes leveling a little risky sometimes, so you have to be a little more careful with this talent than you might want to be. It's just so great to not have to tab Moonfire every single thing. Amazing quality of life change for Druid, for sure. So then we got Incarnation, Chosen a Balloon. This gives you the Armored Moonkin form, increases the damage of your spells by 25% instead, and grants you 15% haste. This lasts for 30 seconds, which doubles the duration of Celestial Alignment, and makes you look really cool. Again, only running Twin Moons because I'm leveling. Incarnation will most likely be the pick for raiding, just because who doesn't want a bigger, stronger cooldown? So the 90 tier has changed dramatically. I don't think actually any of this stuff is in this row right now on live, except maybe Stellar Flare. Star-Lord, Starfall, and Star Surge grant you 3% haste for 15 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Gaining a stack does not refresh the duration. This is very similar to the tier 20 Boomkin tier bonus, which in general was very well received, and I believe is actually almost required for high-end raiding right now on live in Legion. So glad to see that it's here for the people that enjoy that, and will probably be very useful early on, because haste is at such a premium at the item level we are starting at in BFA. Stellar Drift is, I believe, still the same as it is on live, increases Starfall's radius by 30%, and increases its damage by 25%, and you can still cast while moving within it. This is super good for Mythic Plus for sure, although I haven't run any Mythic Plus on this character yet. It's actually only 112 right now. But I can definitely see this continuing to be a very, very strong pick. The talent I chose here, though, is Stellar Flare. I really just wanted to try it out with the current build I'm playing, which has been very successful and very, very strong. So this burns the target for 960 astral damage, and then an additional 5,020 damage over 24 seconds. I figured adding another dot to the rotation would make it much more interesting, and it certainly has. Anytime you're doing multi-target cleave, Stellar Flare performs incredibly well. I'm not sure if the math would put Stellar Drift ahead of it or not, but I just enjoyed the visual of Stellar Flare, and I wanted to try it out since it is beta. So we'll have to wait, of course, for numbers tuning to see which ones go, but this row in general is a very well-designed row, and I very much like the variety it has, where every single one of these gives you some sort of an option, you know, be it for AoE or for single target. You have one that's definitely more single target oriented in Stellar Flare, Stellar Drift, which is just purely AoE, and of course Star-Lord, which is a little bit of both, so this will probably be our go-to for the most part. Now, here in the very last row, most of this has changed significantly as well. Shooting Stars, Moonfire and Sunfire damage over time have a 10% chance to call down a falling star, dealing astral damage and generating 2 astral power. This, I believe, is the same as it is on live right now. This one feels a little lackluster. I don't know if the damage needs to be tuned up, or if maybe that proc chance needs to go up, but I did not see a ton out of it, and it really surprised me. Now over here we have New Moon. This gives us Moon back, the people that love that for the rotation to flesh it out. This is definitely that button that's going to do it, and it gives you that amazing, amazing visual of dropping the moon on people, which everybody loves. Didn't pick it, though, because Fury of Balloon's been completely redone, and this is way better than the current incarnation. Fury of Balloon, 45-yard range, instant, 1.3 minute cooldown. I believe this scales with haste, which is why we're at that awkward number. Calls down a beam of pure celestial energy that follows the target enemy for 8 seconds, dealing 624 astral damage to all nearby enemies every second, and it generates 40 astral power over its duration. Now, I first saw this and I thought, well, that can't be that good, right? Well, then I realized that because you don't have to manage this anymore, that's just free 40, it's a free 40 astral power every 1.3 minutes, and in your standard rotation, anytime you're pulling big, this thing does insane damage. I don't believe the tooltip actually reflects the actual damage it's doing, because it felt like it did a ton more. To put it into perspective, I used Fury of Balloon once on an AoE pack that I was fighting here, and it did somewhere around 6,500 damage on a single cast, which may not seem like a whole lot, but keep in mind that Moonfire and Sunfire only ended up taking a couple of times, and they only did, looks like in total, about 3,900 damage. So it does a substantial amount of damage. And with that substantial amount of damage comes more astral power, which of course leads to more damage. Hooray! So that's all I have for you for Boomkin right now. I want to thank you guys so much for stopping. You know, I've had a great time checking out Boomkin. If anybody has any suggestions or requests for specs for me to check out, I figure I can go ahead and just do the whole 2 levels up and, you know, run a couple of dungeons, get a general feel for the class and spec. If there's something someone specifically would like me to look at, or maybe even a specific talent build, let me know in the comments. And, you know, if you like what you saw here today, be sure you like the video, throw me a subscribe, it helps me grow. The sooner I can monetize these videos, the sooner I can make a lot more content and really up my production value. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye!